Hello. Hello. Let me turn on some. Something a bit relaxed. Just to have something in the background while we wait a little bit for. And to learn a little bit more about language. Why language is weird. How language changes. This is. You're in order? My tweets went out. Yes. People who actually want to find me and learn a little bit. So, because learning is fun. Learning should be fun. And for nothing else than learning that learning can be fun, exciting, is why I'm doing. So how's everyone? Well, hopefully coming in. A message. Just hold on a second. Will I deal with this? Shouldn't be long. All right. So, I'm not going to start right away because I do want to have a chance to come here to trickle in a bit, to settle down, and for those who really want to get out their books and yeah, to get all of the brain fog out of the while getting ready to learn a little. And enjoying some of this nice classic day music, which fits, I believe. Might turn down the stream, the music for the stream a little bit, just to make sure it's not overpowering it. And to get a little bit of that cafe, that Viennese coffee house atmosphere going, which is really what I'm aiming. This is not a lecture hall, this is not a seminar, otherwise I wouldn't have called it Talk Tuesday. This is chatting, this is just pleasant afternoon, or morning, or evening, depending on where you are. And getting a bit of brain training, a bit of that mental stimulation going. So grab a nice cup of coffee or tea or hot chocolate or your comfy beverage of choice while we wait just a little bit more so that people can come here and settle in. Enjoy the vibes. I myself, I just have some water. Which is good enough. I'll be doing a lot of talking, so I don't want anything irritating right now. And of course I forget to turn off or turn my phone silent. Good job, me. Well, that has been done. That is now finished. I am still working on making this whole thing a little better, one step at a time, just small improvements here and there, so I can incorporate them bit by bit. And if anything goes wrong that I don't have to troubleshoot 15 things at once, no one wants to watch that. That is not when they've come here to learn about something completely different. So for this time, nice music. Let me see. Oh, it's not cap. Is it not capturing my... This is what I was talking about. Exactly. Talking about. Let's publish. We get to do some of it live. Hooray. So let me see. I have a window capture here, but that's not updating. So that's not what I want. Had the game cap beta, and I decided not to. He's captured. Hmm. This is very, very unfortunate. Nope. This is unfortunate. This is very unfortunate. Hmm. Well, for now, I believe I can find a temper. Hmm. Let's see. Not what I would do. There we go. This is a bit messy. Oh, hello there, Jin. How are you doing? Welcome to Talk Tuesday as I troubleshoot my OBS because OBS is once again acting up like it does. All right. Go. Hopefully this is going to work. Ah, slightly better. All right. I hope the music wasn't doubled up. I just realized that it was probably doubled up because OBS is messy. Let me try. All right. I hope this is okay. Yeah, welcome. Today, no game for now. No game for today. At least not in this session. Instead, today is Talk Tuesday, where it's all about learning things. In this case, learning a bit about language. And why language is so weird sometimes, and how language changes, and what that means. is a bit thick. It. Ah. So just reject language, return to monkey. Indeed. Indeed. Language makes everything complicated. No fun. Just checking right now to see if some more people want to drop in. And just putting some words on the screen right now that have to do with language change. There we go. Right. A for colors. Give me, yeah. Alright. I think I'll give it another minute or so. Feel free to grab a drink. See if any more people would like to drop in, would like to learn a little bit. Because learning is fun. See if people are interested in learning a bit about English and language change in general. Close. Been about 20 minutes. So I guess I'll just start off with some basic pointers, basic points, and then yeah, continue off any ideas and comments and questions. So first point of I wrote two very simple words on here, and these words are very often taken as, why are they spelled this way? Why is there a silent K? What is this K doing? Why is this GH in here? Why is there a GH in here that is like, what is this doing here? Why are there other GHs that have completely different pronunciations? What's happening here? Well, the GH, this case is just an example. The question shouldn't be, why is English spelling weird? Come on. It should be. Why is English pronunciation? Because these spellings are not coincidence. These spellings came from how these words used to be pronounced. The GH has a point in this word. K has a point. These words used to be pronounced more or less like they were written. And of course, you would have in Middle English something more akin to this, but the exact spelling is not that important. What is important is that this word used to be pronounced nicht. And if I pronounce it like this, you see, oh, the K, or in this case the hard C, was pronounced. The H or the GH, which was a yoh, by the way, a completely different letter, used to be pronounced. Right? Same with this. This is the GH. And if you look at German words, the German cognates to these, you can see that they are still in there. Right? The German equivalents, because they came from the same root words. Right? Still have that CH. In German it became a CH. But it is still in there. And it is still pronounced. That shows you that the sounds used to exist in the common proto-language, in Germanic. So what happened? What is up with English spelling and English pronunciation? What is going on here? And this is a very interesting point. English has something called etymological spelling. Etymological spelling. But etymological spelling is often opposed to, you can't really call it phonetic spelling because it doesn't exist, but I'm going to put this in quotation. Phonetic, or perhaps phonemic spelling. My pen doesn't want to. Okay. Right? So, etymological spelling, as the name implies, preserves the etymology of a word, preserves the historical development of the word. Yes, in modern English, this word is pronounced night. Word. If I can pick yet another color. This is a nice thing about doing this digital. Just pick a lot of colors. Night. Right? This is more or less, not this. How you pronounce the word. but it used to be pronounced nicht. And this historical information, this etymological information, is preserved in the spelling. And that's what etymological spelling means. It preserves the old form or an old form of each word. Another language that is pretty famous for having etymological spelling is French. Right? French, for example, you have a lot of letters in French words that are silent in modern French pronunciation. But they used to be pronounced in older French 300 years ago. And you get a lot of strange, well, you get a lot of interesting sounds coming out of certain letters or letter combinations that don't really make any sense if you look at them from a modern perspective. So in French you have an O, you have an E, just as the two vowels are typically pronounced in a lot of languages. But then if you combine them together, you get wa. You see, where does that come from? What is happening here? How does OE become wa? Well, that's, again, etymological spelling. Because French spelling hasn't been updated since 1700s, about 300 years ago. And back then, the spelling actually followed how words were said, how words were pronounced. So a word like modern French roi, king, was roi, or something along those lines, right? And that's why it was spelled like this, because that is how people said the word. And then the spelling was fixed into this, and then language just kept happily changing. And it just, pronunciation kept changing as it does, but the spelling was never updated to match that. So now you get strange combinations like this, where you have an oi becoming a wa sound, French. And this is another example of etymological spelling. Right? Oops. What did I just press? Ah, okay. Be careful what buttons I hit. Right. Right, so the old form of the word is preserved in the spelling, but language changed, as language does. Now, this is more visible in French than it is in English, because in English you get the GH is especially infamous because there are various different ways it is pronounced or not pronounced at all, right? But there are some regularities, right? A KN, the K is always silent. Same with a GN, right? The G is always silent. Then there is, in French, for instance, the OI is always wa. Right? There is no word oi unless you maybe do this to differentiate it. But the general rule is OI or OE is always wa. And always, this is the key word here. That's because sound changes are systematic. Right? So in language change, when we talk about language change, a lot of people think about things like new words emerging or grammar getting adapted. And yes, those are changes. Those are definitely parts of language change, but they are not the main driving motor of. They are not what really creates language evolution. A new word here or there, it doesn't do much to the language overall, right? But the actual fundamental change that drives language change overall is phonetic change. Sounds changing. And very importantly, phonetic change is systematic, not random. This was a huge discovery by a group called the Young Grammarians, somewhere 150, 200 years ago. A group of linguists, back when linguistics was only just a budding science. And they discovered that, yes, any individual sound change, you cannot necessarily predict that. But the change, when it does happen, happens systematically throughout the entire language. Right? So when you get an oi in French, you get this pronunciation changing to a wa. How would something like this? A wa. That is systematic. That happens throughout the entire language, not just in one or two words, but everywhere. And that is a key point in language change. This means that there is a system in how language changes. Right? This means that if you get a certain change, any kind of change, be it one vowel changing into another, a consonant changing into another, a sound disappearing, and so on, it is always systematic. Now, the individual change might be very concise and might be very restricted. So you might only get sound X changes to sound Y only under these specific circumstances. But even that happens systematically. Even that changes everywhere. So one example. Oh, my Krita is saving. Okay. One example is where you would have a consonant in between two vowels. And so you have, for instance, the word sure in English, right? So you have, this is sh sound. The fact that it's written with an S is not important right now, but you have this sound. And then you have a different word like so, where the S is je, leisure, not leisure. Right? And that is simply a change of the sh sound becoming je when it appears between two vowels. And this is something we see in other words. Vision, right? There in English we don't really get vis on its own anymore. We maybe get it in like vis-a-vis, which is not a perfect example because again, this is two vowels. But it's the same basic idea. It's vision, not vision. Right? And this is just a process of this sound, and we can write it as this sound becoming this sound when in between two vowels. Right? And this is a systematic change. It is a very limited change. Right? It has a very strict condition, and it affects a sound that's not all that common in English to begin with, but it is a systematic change. And this happens throughout the entire language. And that is what drives language change, sound changes, and phonetic change. And these small phonetic changes lead to a whole host of other changes in lexicon, as in the words, in grammar, and then resulting from that in sentence structure, and so on. Right? So, a very, 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 very common change happens throughout a lot of languages is a combination of two things. First is that you have stressed. Oh, hello, Goliath. How are you doing? Talking about language change here. Right. Using a couple of examples from English to get into how languages actually changed. The process by which they change. So if that's something you're interested in, German, but you know, Germanic, because the example here is you have this silent or this weird GH in English, but if you look into other Germanic languages, there's still a system in there. And it's to show that the GH is not just randomly inserted into the word, but that it actually had a meaning. Yeah, and then the difference between etymological spelling and phonetic or phonemic spelling on the other side, right? And from that, the fact that language change is driven by phonetic change, and that phonetic change is systematic. That it happens across the entire language. If a certain change happens, this change will propagate throughout the entire language. And one example of a very limited change was the sound of sh here in sure, turning into a j, right, when in between two vowels. This is how to write it. And it's very limited because It is a sound that doesn't appear very often, and it needs to be in a condition that also doesn't appear very often, but it is systematic, and that's the important. And the point I was just getting to is that phonetic change is the driver of a lot of other changes that happen in language. So there is a combination of changes, of two changes that happens very frequently throughout many different languages, that then leads to changes in grammar and word formation. So the first change is when you have a word with multiple syllables, you tend to have one syllable that has the accent, right? The stress. And then you have a bunch of other unstressed, unaccented syllables. One thing that tends to happen is that the unstressed syllables, usually the last one, gets weakened, right? So you might have some vowel in here, an A or an O or something, and that gets turned into a schwa, right? Just so it gets weakened. And then that change leads to a weakened final syllable getting completely deleted because you barely pronounce it anyway, and it doesn't carry a lot of meaning necessarily, right? So it just gets deleted. Or an alternative path is that several different forms that relied on differentiation in the final syllable all become the same, right? So you may have had one form that ended with an A and another form that ended with an O, and now they both become a form that looks the same by having a schwa. Right? So you can no longer tell these two forms apart. And this drives grammar. This change drives grammar. If your language uses grammatical endings to signify things like case or number or anything at the end of a word, and you either delete that ending or it becomes the same across multiple categories, then that differentiation is lost. So it and that then means that the grammar changes. Suddenly, if you use things like conjugation tables or so with different endings, and all of a sudden all of the endings end up being the same one, well, then you're not conjugating anymore, right? There's no more different forms. And again, you can see that in English, where all but the third person singular, all the verbs, yes, this is most likely how English lost its noun classes. And it's different verb endings, right? If you have like I go, you go, he, she, it goes, this is the only one that is still different. Then we go, you go, and then they. So all of these endings just disappeared because of this general process, right? Where the verb endings were weakened and eventually just deemed unimportant, or not worth the effort of pronouncing, and were just deleted, and that's it, right? So you get all of these forms are now exactly the same, right? And yes, noun classes are the same, where you noun classes and things like cases in English. Right? If you look at older English, and by older English I mean things like actual Old English and Middle English, you can still see how the nouns had different endings depending on what case they were in or what class they belonged to. And over time, the endings were weakened and eventually became the same or completely deleted. And now, because the only way to differentiate noun classes has been removed, the noun classes themselves disappeared. Yes. same in German actually. A lot of cases look the same. And some of them are slowly being lost. Yes. That does lead to other things in the language changing as well. Yes, kind of. At the start is relative. So language change doesn't happen from today to tomorrow. It takes many generations and several centuries. So when you say German is at the start of it, kind of, but this process has been going on for 2 centuries or so at least, right? Which is relatively short in terms of language change. But yes, you could say it's at the start. On a scale of Icelandic to English, it's closer to Icelandic than even Dutch. I suppose so. Also because, as far as I know, Dutch then created new categories, new noun categories like animate and inanimate, instead of masculine, feminine, neuter. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Dutch then recategorized its nouns or just went a different path. Yeah, okay, masculine, feminine fused. Yes, definitely. Right. It's possible though that this fusion also came by because of an animate inanimate differentiation, right? Which is a very common differentiation in languages, right? One of the first ways to categorize nouns is to put them into animate and inanimate. And you find that a lot in different languages. But yeah, this is generally how language change is driven, phonetic change. Now, this is an example of loss of phonetic information or loss of information, but it can go the other way. You often see it as a fourth case. You mean the animate inanimate thing? Be a fourth case? Ah, okay. Well, fourth group then, not case. Case is something else. Case is things like nominative and accusative and such. But yeah, a fourth noun group. Yeah. What was I saying? Yes. So this is an example of differentiation, and with that, information being lost. Oops, I did not want to draw something here. No. But it can go the opposite way as well, right? Oh, Prodigal Piccolo, hello. Welcome for the follow. Welcome for the thank you. Oh my god, my brain. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the guild. Hope you'll join us for many adventures. Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. Um, yeah, using terminology is a bit icky when talking about like certain aspects. Yeah, in this instance, yes. Okay. As an archaeologist and anthropologist, oh, nice. Yeah, language is really weird, but it is weird with a system, and that's what I'm hoping to illustrate a little bit. So yeah, welcome, and feel free to join, and feel free to ask questions if you have any, really. Um, so weird with the system. Kind of. It's more like the thing with language is it's a tacit agreement among the speakers, right? All the speakers agree to use language in a certain way so that we can use it for its intended tool, intended use, which is a tool for communication. And if people start to stray too far too quickly from the agreed upon standard or the agreed upon yeah, I guess standard is the best way to put it. You would no longer be able to communicate effectively with others. Sometimes that is wanted. Sometimes you want to establish an in-group and out-group. That's where you get slang, right? That's where you get certain yeah, group slang, like youth language is very much like that. Also related, 99% of bureaucracy is scamming people out of things they're entitled to using language. Yeah, yeah. Bureaucracy is yes. Using language in a very specific way so that lay people no longer understand. Yes. But I think it kind of goes in the other direction with language itself, right? So in language, you want, the general goal is you want to be understood, and you want to understand other people when speaking the same language. So you all agree upon a certain format, a certain standard, and you use it, right? Now there are slight variations between certain groups and even between individuals, but these slight variations are imperceptible to the common speaker and do not hinder communication, do not hinder understanding. Right? However, these slight variations might build up over time and over generations and lead to these sound changes. And then when enough people over enough time have then adopted these sound changes, and enough time really means several generations, right? Where the people who spoke the old version of the language have been dead for a long time. So you can no longer compare with other speakers from previous generations. Then the language has undergone a change. And there is actually an example of this happening live right now. There are many examples of sound changes happening live. It's a closed system, yet the entropy keeps increasing. Not really, actually, because it's not directional. Language change is not directional. That's why it's so difficult to predict language change, right? It's like, it's very difficult to say, oh, language in 500 years will look like this. We can say maybe 1 or 2 changes are very likely to happen because we're seeing them happen right now. But it is not directional. Because, again, language is a tool used to communicate. And as such, language needs to be able to capture human thoughts. And so long as the complexity of human thoughts stays the same, the complexity of language needs to stay the same. Right? Otherwise, if it becomes less complex than thoughts, it's no longer useful. If it becomes too complex, if it becomes more complex than thoughts, then that is wasted energy, right? So it's a self-correcting system, but it is not directional. So you see that very often whenever there are changes that lead to one aspect of language being simplified, there are other areas of the language that then become more rigid or more complex. In the case of English, a lot of noun endings and verb endings and such were lost, which means we can no longer differentiate between cases and such in nouns, which has led to English sentence structure becoming extremely rigid. English sentence structure has very strict rules where you need to put what information to convey what you want to convey. In English, you have an SVO order: subject, verb, object. And this is the standard. Right? Language as a whole, language changes that happen in one part, not another, keep building up, splitting up into new languages. Yes. Yes. But at the same time, languages also go extinct, sadly, right? Yeah, that is true. But yeah, the example of English here, if you have the boy kicks the dog, right? You know for a fact that the boy is the subject, the thing doing the kicking, and the dog is the object, the thing being kicked, because of the position in the sentence. If you reverse these two items, the dog kicks the boy. Oops. That's messy. Sorry, let me. You get a completely different sentence. The words are exactly the same, but the meaning has been flipped around simply because of sentence structure. Right? So syntax actually encodes information like this in English. Right? You must pay attention to how you structure your sentences depending on what information you want to convey. This is not the case in German. German, because it still has differentiation in the cases, not as much and not as clear, but it still exists. In German, you can change syntax without changing the underlying meaning. So, the exact same sentence in German, right? Der Junge tritt den Hund. Come on, please. Right? Peter's being a bit. And den Hund tritt der Junge. Again, exact same words, exact same pieces. All you've done is switch these two around, right? But the meaning in the German sentences remains the same. Simply because you still have the markers in here showing this is accusative and this is nominative, right? So sentence structure does not change grammar in German. So you do not have to take that into account when thinking about what you're trying to convey. Biased Latin in school for this. Proper Latin had very rigid structure. It's so many cases and possibilities. Yes. Yes and no. Like, the Latin you learn in school is the Latin used by very, very highly educated people, right? So the Latin they used was not everyday Latin. The Latin they used was highly stylized Latin. That is something that that doesn't get told, sadly. So the Latin you learn is from official texts, from speeches, from poetry, and such. And yes, vulgar Latin, the thing that people actually spoke every day, not in pre-written speeches or texts or things like that, was a lot freer and was a lot yeah, you could say it was easier because you had fewer rules you had to obey. Because at some point in the Latin that you learn in school, a lot of the rules are not linguistic or grammar rules, they are stylistic rules, right? Always having the SOV. Latin has an SOV sentence structure, right? Subject, object, verb. Always abiding to that sentence structure. Always putting certain words together and such. That a lot of that is style. And not necessarily grammar. The whole point of redundancy is that you have room for mistakes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that is also the reason why sometimes you double up on certain things. Like you convey the same piece of information in two different ways for redundancy. So in English, you get that in this case. This is one example, right? In all the other verb forms, okay, the verb form is the same. You must use the pronoun in order to say what kind of a person you're talking about, right? Singular, plural, first person, and so on. For third person singular, technically you have the verb to tell you this information, but you still use the pronoun to double up on the information and to create redundancy. And redundancy is a feature, not a bug. Redundancy reduces the amount of miscommunication, right? As a failsafe. Vibed a lot better with Greek because it felt much looser. I didn't really do a lot of Greek, so I can't really comment on that, but I can imagine, right? Latin, again, a lot of the Latin you learn is formal things. Again, it gets a lot more interesting once you go into poetry, because then people actually play with the language, and then you can see, oh, it's actually much more free, much more loose than the speeches make it out to be. But yeah, that's learning the prestige form, the highly stylized form of a language, right? It's the same with things like Sanskrit, or the same with classical Arabic, which is a whole nother can of worms on in its own, right? So those are liturgical languages, highly stylized and formalized languages. And then you would have more vulgar forms. Vulgar, not in a negative sense, vulgar simply as used in everyday, right? Which were not as heavily stylized. So you get things like modern standard Arabic, which has fewer rules than classical Arabic, because while modern standard Arabic is still a highly stylized version, it is not as stylized as the language of the Quran, right? Or you have Prakrit, which is the vulgar form of Sanskrit, which is actually where the modern Indian languages came from. Vulgar Latin, no, sex positive, yeah. So again, Sanskrit very, very highly stylized and formalized because it was a liturgical language. It was used for ceremonies and for writing down the religious texts of Hindu and Buddhist, of the Hindu and Buddhist religions and such. But Prakrit, the actual language that people spoke back then, not as formalized, and that's actually where modern northern and central, right, Indian languages come from. So yeah, that's also another thing, and that is trying to control or contain language change, which is a very iffy issue at best, right? Because language change, like I said, is something that happens naturally, and to come on, okay, to go to let me get this a modern example that is currently happening right now under our very noses, and many people who aren't interested, or who not aren't interested, wrong way to say it, who haven't read that much into linguistics, don't know about this change. And this change is the cot merger. Right? Place where to shove language prescriptivists, and I have a name. Yeah. That's another thing. Language prescriptivism. A certain amount of prescriptivism is simply part of the tacit agreement that I was talking earlier, right? If you wish to completely change every meaning of a word or completely change how you pronounce things from one day to the next, no one will be able to communicate with you, right? So that staying within the tacit agreement of a certain usable standard is just using language. But then saying this new word is wrong, or the way you say this is incorrect, when there are thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people saying a word a certain way, that is going too far. Yeah, exactly. Right, that would be stepping way out of bounds of the tacit agreement. Right? But as long as you're understood, then it's a lot less of a deal than people make it out to be. So yeah, the cot merger, and if you listen carefully, I have that merger. I don't differentiate between these two. So the cot merger is a sound merger between two vowels. As you can probably guess, the vowel that is in cot and the vowel that is in cot, like when I say them, they're no different because I have undergone the merger. In my personal way of speaking, I don't differentiate between those two. But in certain parts of the world, large parts of the US, Canada, and so on, these two words are actually pronounced differently. Let me see if I can actually find how someone without the merger would pronounce them. Hold on, there is, let me turn down the, there is an example on Wikipedia between a non-merged and a merged speaker. Right, so that merged speaker, caught. Right? Caught. Is that hearable on stream? Can you hear that? I don't know. Maybe if I turn up the volume.
Caught. Caught.
Can you hear that? I'm not sure. I can hear. Okay, yeah. So that is someone who has the merger, and then someone who doesn't have the merger.
Caught. Caught.
Aha.
Caught. Caught.
Caught and caught.
Caught. Caught.
Right? So, all right. And the music's probably gonna be way too loud now. Ah. Okay, sorry about that. For me, yeah, I learned a kind of Midwesternish American that comes from my parents. So that's my standard. My natural English dialect or accent in this case. So yeah, so I have the merger. But you would have cat and caught, right, between those two. And here's the thing. And these are not the only two words. There are a whole bunch of other words with the same two sounds that are also getting merged. And both types of speakers exist at the same time and often in the same. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I misclicked. Sorry. Almost saw my email. Almost doxed myself there. Not bat and bot. I think those are too distinct. A couple of other words are pond and pond, bot and bot. As some examples, right? And I have the merger. Like you cannot. So bot and pond there, pond and pond there. Yes. yes, that's why I wrote them down. These are a couple of other examples. So this is a merger that is happening under everyone's noses, and people don't realize it because it doesn't hinder communication. These words are usually not used exchangeably. They don't mean even close to the same thing, right? And one is a noun, one is a verb, right? In all cases, this is so, right? Nouns and verbs. So you wouldn't even find them in the same position. You would not find them in the same context. So just from context alone, from speaking alone, people can tell which word you are meaning, right? Yesterday, I caught the train. Okay, I'm definitely talking about this one, right? I'm not talking about this one, the noun, right? On the train, I had to sleep in a cot. Okay, I'm talking about this one now, the noun, and not the verb. So just from context, it's clear what I'm talking about, right? So you don't get those two mixed up. And that means it is possible for someone with the merger to talk to someone without the merger and them having no trouble understanding each other at all. And they might not even realize that they are saying things differently because, again, these words might not even appear that closely together for someone to realize, hold on. All right. Have fun and yeah, have a good dinner. So might not even realize that that someone is pronouncing them the same or someone is pronouncing them differently. But the merger is happening and the merger is actually spreading. right? It used to be in 3 isolated areas in the US, and it has now spread over large parts of North America. And if this does continue like such in this way, then in 2 or 3 generations, it's very likely, or maybe a couple more, it's very likely that everyone will have the merger. And then you will have these 2 sounds become the same sound, which is exactly what is happening down there. And so the merger is an example of exactly this happening, right? 2 different sounds becoming the same sound. And technically, you are losing a bit of information. But contextually, this doesn't matter, because the words are different enough that you don't get them mixed up, right? In all cases. So, and people don't notice it, right? If you tell them about the cot merger, or if you ask them to say these words, a lot of people don't realize that they are saying them differently or not. And sometimes some people even use both. Sometimes they have the merger, sometimes they don't, depending on maybe who they're speaking to, or if they're tired or not, or whatever, right? A lot of different possibilities. And that is what makes sound changes possible. The sound changes are so minute and happen so slowly, relatively speaking, that we don't notice them until it's too late, so to speak, right? Until the sound change has been done, and then we only notice that there was a change if you actually look at it scientifically and look at language change and then realize, hold on, there was something different before. And it is these small systematic changes. And like I said, phonetic changes are systematic. So it's not just these 2 words, cot and cot, but also all other words that, or word pairs, that have the same combination of vowels. There are a couple more possibly. And all of them go through the same change systematically. So languages are weird, yes. The weirdness comes from accumulated changes over millennia, right? Languages have been around for probably as long as humans have been around, right? 100, 200,000 years. We just don't have any records of that. More or less obviously, because writing as a technology wasn't invented until about 5,000 years ago, right? Before that, writing didn't exist. So we have no reliable way of tracing languages much further past than that. We can go a bit further with reconstruction and other techniques. So we can go back maybe another 2, 3, 4,000 years before that. But anything past that, anything like 10,000 years ago or older, we just don't have records, right? But humans have been around that long, and one of the defining traits of humans is language. And if humans have been around that long, that means language in some form or another has been around that long. And that means over hundreds of thousands of years, these small changes accumulated and made languages the strange mess that they are today. And a lot of things can be explained by history, right? Why is knight, right, the mounted warrior in English? Oops, why is it written like this? In this weird form? Well, because in like 1,000 years ago, it actually was pronounced, or 1,500 years ago, it was actually pronounced Knecht. So that spelling comes from there, right? There is an explanation. There is a historical explanation. And for a lot of things in language, there are historical explanations that are just no longer visible in the current form. But there are just so many small changes, so many accumulated changes, and so many attempts, just natural attempts of speakers to try and make sense of their language, that languages have become really weird and really messy simply because humans are not consistent. Because we're human. We're lazy. We like to not spend a lot of energy when we speak. Makes sense. And we are not consistent, especially intergenerationally. We're not consistent. And that leads to, yeah, a very fascinating tapestry of human history and how humans made sense of the very tool they use to encode their thoughts. And I think that's a good place to, yeah, good ending note, right? So, languages, the conclusion for today, languages are a messy but also fascinating tapestry of human thinking come on, through history. Right? By looking at the languages, we can see how human thought, thinking patterns, such have changed or how they have stayed the same. Once again, languages, looking at humans, or linguistics, looking at humans through the lens of language. And here's an example, a very concrete example of how this is. Right. If there are no final questions, I guess, or final comments, I want to thank everyone who dropped by, everyone who's here. I hope you learned a little something, and I hope you enjoyed this session. I am going to do this every Tuesday. This is a regular feature of my channel now. Today was only the second session, but yeah. This is indeed the only scheduled thing right now in my channel. So Talk Tuesday happening every Tuesday. And different topics, right? The first 2 weeks now we had linguistics. But there are a lot of other topics I want to delve into. And a lot of other things I'm interested in and would just like to discuss. Show you, right? So, again, well, thanks a lot for coming by. And we are going to look for someone to raid. So let's see if anyone is online. Yes, let me just check that the stream is ending. Yeah. Looks okay. We are well, I'm glad you thought so. And I mean, the main goal of this is the actual content of what you learn here is secondary. And what I want to show is that learning itself can be fun and can be fascinating, which is sadly something that a lot of schools don't accomplish, right? A lot of kids come out of school thinking, I'm never going to touch another book again. I'm never going to learn another thing again. And that is sad. That's very sad. So I want to try and change that. I'm an educator myself. So I want to try and bring the joy back to learning. So I'm glad you at least enjoyed listening in today. But yeah, we are going to raid the Anupet Munuth. I think I got that right. Who is currently streaming Pokemon on Minecraft. So something completely different, but still a nice person. Right? Go say hi to them and enjoy like the comfy vibes. So let me get this right. Raid. Huh? Yes. All right. Yeah. So yes, thank you for coming by. I am going to stream some other days this week with some games. I'm not too sure yet about the schedule. My life is still a bit up and down, so no fixed schedule beside this session right now. If I don't see you then, hopefully I'll see you again for next Talk Tuesday. Thanks for coming by. Take care. And bye-bye.